It's time! Our main event of the evening. Fighting out of the red corner with a record of 0 wins, 782 losses. We have liberal YouTube history channels. And out of the blue corner with an undefeated record of 789 and 0, Midwestern Marx. Woo!
Nicholas had been busy playing with his new best friend. Tensions in Europe had been rising.
Oops. Start from the beginning here.
While Nicholas had been busy playing with his new best friend, tensions in Europe had been rising. It just so happened that in 1914, one Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary went for a drive with the top down in Sarajevo. One thing leads to another, and suddenly Russia found itself at war with half of Europe. A wave of patriotism swept through Russia. The capital was renamed to Petro.
Yeah, that's what happened. Right? Everybody knows that's how World War I started, right? It was just the Archduke got assassinated, and then all these countries were like, we have to sacrifice millions of our own people in the most brutal war that perhaps humanity has ever seen. I mean, that's why you don't get as many movies about World War I as World War II, because you didn't have this like grand narrative that makes a good movie, with the heroes and villains. And sometimes that World War II narrative is oversimplified too, to make the British and the US seem like the heroes, as if they didn't, facilitate and allow the rise of Nazi Germany when the Soviet Union had wanted to take them out much earlier. But either way, World War I, there's less movies about it because it was so brutal and so nonsensical. But this is something that's personal for me, because I remember as a kid in history class never, ever, 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 ever understanding why World War I happened. I was like, this doesn't make any damn sense to me. Countries don't go to war like because some Archduke got assassinated, and now every country in the world gets pulled into a war because we have these political alliances. Like, it just doesn't seem right to me. There's always, a real material incentive for countries to go to war beyond just, these abstractly existing political alliances. And when I read Lenin's Imperialism, it was the biggest light bulb moment, not only because it helped me understand imperialism and, the wars of my generation, the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, and all these things, but it explained World War I to me, right? Because I was like, I just don't see countries going to such a brutal and horrible and disastrous war because the Archduke got assassinated. And then I read Lenin's Imperialism, and he's like, well, these were the capitalist imperialist powers of the time, and they were fighting with each other, competing with each other. And World War I was a war between them over the colonies, over who got to be the dominant global empire. So, and then when I read that, I was like, oh, now that makes sense. Now that is a reason I could see a bunch of countries going to war. If they're trying to do, or if they have economic incentive to do it, if they're fighting each other over the colonies, if they're competing imperialist powers. But everybody's told this myth, in this like really superficial view of World War I is taught in America, that it was just the Archduke being assassinated, as if that wasn't, maybe the lighting of the fuse that lit the powder keg. But the powder keg, the basis of the war, was the fight for economic / political control of the globe and the colonies.
Regret, because St. Petersburg sounded a bit too German. Even revolutionaries were getting on board. To them, World War I was a big stinky imperialist war, but they didn't want their big stinky imperialist replaced by a foreign one. So pretty much everyone wanted Russia to win. I hope Russia loses. Geez, read the room, Lenin. Lenin hoped Russia would lose because that would help him overthrow the Tsar. As long as he did that, who cares if...
I messed it up putting ourselves in the blue corner. You're right. I wouldn't say Lenin necessarily just hoped Russia would lose full stop, as in, he was this unpatriotic guy who wanted his own country to lose and wanted the Russian troops to be hurt. But rather, he recognized what the war was. It was the Tsars sending people to fight and die in these wars for territorial expansion. right? And this was a decaying and decrepit system that was overextending itself because of the Tsar's mismanagement and constant efforts for expansion. So Lenin's idea, that's sometimes called revolutionary defeatism, is basically just, let's use this war to launch a revolution that can fix our country. Right? Let's use this war, which is an imperialist war, an unnecessary war, a war that doesn't benefit our country or the working people of our country. Let's use this as an opportunity to foment revolution and transform our system for the better. And that's what they did. World War I was extremely influential in creating the conditions that allowed for the Russian Revolution.
Germany blows up half the country. And blow up half the country, they did. An inefficient Tsarist government meant there were shortages of just about everything you need to fight a war. And if losing a teensy-weensy war with Japan upset the people, losing a giant Wyatt war like this was much worse. Soldiers were deserting, the economy was imploding, and in no time, Russia was starving. The peasants were getting more peasanty, the workers were getting more workery, all the while Germany was getting more Germanery. Dmitry, we need to win.
They didn't really have much of a chance. They were such a semi-feudal country, and they were trying to industrialize, and modernize so they could compete with the other imperialist powers. But Lenin, I believe, saw Russia as the weakest link in the imperial chain. He saw them as the weakest and least developed and least industrialized country, imperialist, competing superpower, the main countries fighting in World War I. And that's why he thought they would likely get their asses beat, which would be a good chance to win people to communism, win the soldiers over to communism, ask them, why are we fighting these stupid wars for territorial expansion while our people starve at home?
In this war, I need someone with a great military mind to step in and take control. You're right. How about General Hickenlooper? How about me? You can't run the war. Who'll be in charge of the country while you're gone? Obviously, my German wife and a homeless wizard. Duh. Nicholas declared himself commander-in-chief and went to the front lines, leaving...
See what I mean? Like when they talk about the Tsar, it's pretty funny. Because they're just so, cynical and polemical about the Tsar. They don't do this stupid, Russian ortho bro nonsense about how we need to bring the Tsar back. We need to start shooting our people for expressing themselves politically and being progressive.
His German wife in charge while they were fighting, the Germans. It wasn't a good look. And because Alexander was so close...
We need to start inciting pogroms again. That would help. That's Orthodox canonist.
To Rasputin, people believed that he was actually calling the shots and secretly destroying Russia, and maybe even boinking her. And even worse, look. At this point, a bunch of nobles just couldn't take it anymore. Rasputin is destroying the country. We have to break his magic spell over the Tsar. But how? He's magic. Dude. Very cool. Hey, it's Rasputin. The sexy party is running a little late, but in the meantime, why don't you try one of these totally not poisoned cakes? Dude!
You know what might make Orthodox canonist and all those Russian... I'm sorry, this is very niche. But it's kind of funny, so I gotta say it. What might make Orthodox canonist and all these supporters of the Romanov family and the Russian Tsar who want to bring back monarchy, let's convince them that Rasputin was Jewish. And then they won't know what to think. It'll break their brains. They'll be like, what? The government I like was controlled by them too?
Why'd you say it like that? He's totally gonna know they're poisoned now. Shut up. I said they're not poisoned. Dude, he just ate so much poison. How is he still alive? It must be the magic. Go with plan B. Is he dead? See, Boris, I told you he was the Antichrist and you didn't believe me. Can you shut up for 1 minute and help me roll him up? Are you sure he's dead? I don't know, but I'm supposed to be hosting a charity auction right now. Can we get this over with? Okay, now he's dead. The murder of Rasputin, just like his life, is shrouded in mystery and speculation. He probably didn't really die like that, but he also probably didn't really heal people. He probably didn't influence the Tsar as much as people thought. He probably wasn't secretly destroying the country. But what he definitely did do, even in his death, was ruin the Tsar's reputation. Russia's hypocrisy looked more outdated than ever, and the Russian people were taking notice. Come on, men. Remember what we're fighting for. Yeah, no, we're out.
And from a Marxist perspective, we see that the feudal relations of production were becoming outdated. Russia was being surpassed by all the other imperial powers who had moved on to industrial capitalism. Feudalism was a backward system. Their country was far too agrarian to compete with these other countries and produce enough to feed the entire country and feed the troops and whatnot. So the feudal relations of production were becoming outdated, which was leading to class struggle and mass unrest against the feudal ruling class, which was the czars and the landowners.
World War I left Russia broke, hungry, and exhausted.
Too fast? All right, I'll slow her down.
And with Nicholas acting as commander-in-chief, he was getting even more blame. For the second time, Russia was on the brink of revolution. By 1917, Russia had been fighting a war it couldn't afford for 3 years. They were running out of many things, most worryingly, food. On International Women's Day, 1917, thousands of hungry women...
Yo, what the hell kind of accusation is that in the chat? That is such a disgusting and completely untrue accusation, which is why you have no evidence, you idiot. Jesus. People are so disgusting. They'll say anything. I've worked with kids my entire life, and I've never been accused of anything like that, you disgusting freak.
In Petrograd were so sick of being hungry that they took to the streets. And it turns out it's not just women who experience hunger, but men too. So the next day they joined in as well. Gatherings on the streets were forbidden, but I'm not sure how you'd arrest 250,000 people. The crowds demanded an end to the war, an end to food rationing, and even an end to the Tsar's autocracy. Now normally the troops would deal with this kind of thing, but as it turns out, soldiers get hungry too, and they were also tired of having to kill their fellow Russians so much. So
This is an important point. This is a really important point. It turns out soldiers get hungry and tired too. Right, there are so many people in America who say, we couldn't have a revolution, we couldn't have a communist uprising. The military's so advanced, they would just put it down. Well, not if you get the military on board. Not if the military's tired of going to Iraq, or if the military doesn't want to get sent to Iran, and they're hungry and unable to pay their bills, and they join the side of progress, like what happened in Venezuela or Peru, or with Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso. It was another military leader who did the coup, and then Traore took over for him. But in every single revolution, you know, not only are most military-aged men in the revolution, because that's a very important demographic for actually fighting, but also a lot of members of the actual military basically defect.
Regiments mutinied in the capital, and they joined the crowd as well, trashing symbols of the Tsar.
And that's true of U.S. color revolutions and coups as well. They're often carried out just with like a small reactionary sector of the military.
And his autocratic regime. Things were escalating very quickly. Liberal politicians watching the riots in the streets had long been dissatisfied with the Tsar, since he would shut their parliament down anytime they did something he didn't like. They believed the only way to bring stability back to the streets was for Nicholas II to abdicate. The riots continued. The police fired on soldiers. Soldiers fired on soldiers. The workers re-established the Petrograd Soviet. Politicians began arresting the Tsar's ministers. He may have been an autocrat, but he just lost complete control of his capital city. Talk about embarrassing. Nicholas, the troops have turned against us. The people have taken over the city. They've even cut my phone line. Hello? Hello? The phones are down. Things must be bad. I better go back there. Nicholas hopped on the next train back to Petrograd, but he never made it to the city. His train was met by military generals and other politicians. What's going on? Nicholas, look, man, we need to talk. It's not you, it's us. Who am I kidding? No, it's definitely you. During the whole crisis in Petrograd, the liberals convinced the generals that if Nicholas abdicated, the people would calm down, and the generals were on board. They didn't have time to quell the chaos, because don't forget, they were still losing a global, all-encompassing war against the Germans. And with the military no longer on his side, Nicholas had no choice but to step down. Throughout his entire reign, he had done everything he could to keep all the power for himself.
Do you guys see how America today, it's different because of the advancement of technology, and, you know, conditions have changed, and there are various ways that the conditions are different. But I'm often relating America today to pre-revolutionary Russia. You could also relate it to pre-fascist Germany in a lot of ways as well. But I really see a lot of parallels with pre-revolutionary Russia, in that people at home are more and more fed up. They're less and less satisfied with the state of affairs and with the government, you know, the ruling class, the people in power. And meanwhile, all the people in power can do, including Trump, who promised to be the liberator, the drainer of the swamp, all they can do is start new wars, send, you know, American children to fight and die for oil abroad, because that's what the system does, right? Trump isn't attacking the system at its foundation, so the system is going to keep doing what it do. So, I mean, and this took many years of development in Russia, right? There were many years where people were discontented with the Tsar, but those contradictions grew and grew and grew, and world events like World War I accelerated these contradictions. And we're seeing a similar development in America today, except with capitalism in its like most developed and decaying and decrepit form as compared to feudalism.
And in the end, that's exactly what left him with none. But then there was a big question. Who would replace Nicholas? Well, his son Alexei was next in line. Hey, buddy, Daddy couldn't handle the complex socioeconomic problems.
What you are saying is false. I have sources. You have sources that prove the conditions in pre-revolutionary Russia aren't similar to the conditions in America right now. Okay. What sources?
Of a giant multinational, multi-ethnic empire that's engaged in total war with all of Europe. You think you could give it a shot? Alexei just wasn't ready to be Tsar. Nicholas did have a brother, but given the state of the empire, he wasn't keen either. And so, 300 years of Romanov rule in Russia just kind of came to an end.
There are so many stupid things that happened like this under feudalism, where they were like, then the king died and his only heir was 6. So he became the king. Like I was reading about pre-Mossadegh Iran today, diving into the history of Iran after they launched those strikes on Israel. And like the reason that Mossadegh was able to be elected was because they had a constitutional monarchy, meaning they had like a prime minister and more modern liberal political institutions. But it was mostly appointed by the Shah. But then the Shah was ousted by the USSR and Britain because he had ties to Hitler during World War II. And so his 21-year-old son became the Shah. And then basically the Tudeh party and the National Front led by Mossadegh were able to instate actual elections and get him elected because they had a weak Shah. So it's such a feudalism, such a silly system.
The earlier 1905 revolution hadn't changed much, but this new revolution had left Russia without a Tsar. And still, before the year was over, there would be one more revolution left to come. Nicholas's failure as commander of the armed forces was the final straw that broke the camel's back. Do you think maybe you could have done any better? Well, guess what? It's time to find out in Rise of Kingdoms. Rise of Kingdoms is an epic massive multiplayer free-to-play if you want with fewer troops by using superior strategy. You're wrong. Joan of Arc. That's right, noob. Listen up. I'm about to drop some knowledge. The commander's skill is way more important. Each Rise of Kingdoms commander has their own. Not as cool, but okay.
Part of the ad.
Move your troops into real-time battle. Download into a great empire. Hungry woman. Absolute chaos.
What are we talking about here?
Now, where was I? Oh, yeah. Hungry woman. Absolute chaos. And the end of the Tsar. Oh, hey guys, says here there's been a revolution, and the reign of the Tsars has ended. Oh, come on, I missed another one? Why am I even in this video? Well, it's not like you could have done anything. As long as there's a world war, you can't get back to Russia. Who wants to start a revolution? Dang it! Despite getting rid of Nick, Russia was still at war with half of Europe. The Germans, however, had an idea. They thought that if they helped Lenin get back, he would cause trouble for the new Russian government. So they put him on a train. Destination, Petrograd. It was a long journey, and while Lenin was cooped up in his train, things in Russia were changing. Workers were taking control of their factories. Soldiers were socking it to their mean old officers. Without a Tsar, a big old power vacuum had opened up, and someone needed to fill it. The liberals proposed they be in charge, and they set up the provisional government. The workers, however, had already begun establishing local Soviets, largely controlled by the social revolutionaries and the Mensheviks. And since neither felt like they had the power to oust the other, Russia ended up in a classic dual power conundrum. The two coexisted, with the provisional government becoming the official government, and the elected Soviets issuing orders to the workers and soldiers. This power balance was delicate, and all it would take is one bold revolutionary to come along and give everyone a big-brained beatdown. Oh boy, Lenin's coming home. I can't wait for him to see all the great things we've accomplished. And I'm going to show him my fan art. Oh look, here he comes now. Shut up, shut up! You all suck! The provisional government sucks, the Soviet sucks, even your fan art sucks! Why does he have to be so mean? In case you couldn't tell, Lenin was...
That's so stupid. That's so dumb. All he did was point out that the liberals and the Mensheviks were failing the people. It wasn't that he was telling the people they sucked. He was saying the institutions sucked and they weren't going far enough. And the people agreed with him, which is why they had another revolution.
He wasn't a fan of everything that had been happening. In his April theses, he called the provisional government and the Soviets a bunch of big bourgeois bozos. And he kind of had a point. There was still...
He did have a point. He was spitting.
A lot for the Russian people to be mad about. The provisional government hadn't got Russia out of the war, the people were still hungry, and the peasants were still hoping to get more land. Meanwhile, the Soviets hadn't done much to change things either. But even though they weren't perfect, a lot of people did like what the new government had been doing. There was progress. The secret police were disbanded, the death penalty abolished. They even planned to hold elections, meaning for the first time ever, the Russian people could choose their own government. To many, Lenin seemed like some out-of-touch weirdo. If Lenin wanted to go from whiny irrelevant zero to hunky communist hero, he'd need to shake things up a bit. So he and the Bolsheviks came up with a hot new slogan that promised to give the people what the provisional government wouldn't. Peace. Don't like war? We'll end it. Land. You want land? We'll give it to you. Bread.
Exactly, because the provisional government and the liberals and the Mensheviks didn't actually change anything. They didn't actually revamp society or change the economic structure of society. They left everything the same and added, a few liberal political institutions.
Hungry. Scooby-Dooby-Doo. Lenin also called for all power to the Soviets, which meant getting rid of the provisional government and having the Soviets run the place. A communist dream. The people liked these slogans, and bit by bit, the Bolsheviks became more popular. Some Mensheviks even began switching sides. But even though the people thought Lenin's slogans rocked...
Trotsky! He always went with what side he thought was winning, or whichever side could serve him and his own selfish interests.
As long as the provisional government didn't mess up, they'd continue to support it. So let's check in on the provisional government. Oh, provisional government, you've made a big mess. The provisional government lasted for just 9 months, but those 9 months were chaos. The people wanted Russia out of World War I, but Minister of War Alexander Kerensky thought instead of doing that, why not do the exact opposite? If the people saw more Russian victories, they'd have to support the new government. And that went just about...
Kerensky, what a stupid idea. That's like the ruling class in America today. Man, the people are really struggling to get by. They're living paycheck to paycheck, and they're tired of all their taxes going to endless war. I know what we need. Another war. Another war will inspire the people and get them on our side. Again, this video is actually doing a pretty good job of showing how dysfunctional the government was under the liberals and Mensheviks.
About as well as you might expect. These heavy defeats worsened the Russian economy and made the hungry people hungrier. And by now, I think you know what comes next. They trashed the place. More looting, more riots, more violence. It was like the Tsar had never abdicated. Tens of thousands of armed workers took to the streets during some of the worst violence Petrograd had seen yet. And in response, Kerensky called in the troops, who opened fire on the demonstrators. For now, Lenin and other Bolshevik leaders wanted to distance themselves from the violence, but the crowds marched under Bolshevik slogans, and as a result, Kerensky, now the prime minister, took the opportunity to stamp down on the Bolsheviks. Their leaders were arrested. Lenin was accused of being a German agent, and he was forced to flee to Finland in disguise. This sucks! Now I'll never get to have my revolution. Why are you wearing a dress? It's a disguise, idiot!
Never said that. Never said, no, I won't get to have my revolution. Lenin was a man of iron will. I know that's a joke that they're trying to tell there, but it's actually a mischaracterization because one of Lenin's key personality traits was his iron will and his understanding that the conditions in Russia were revolutionary and there was, in fact, going to be a revolution and that the march of history is inevitable and it would inevitably lead to revolutionary change. He never lost... he never, questioned or abandoned that idea. Maybe he questioned that idea throughout his life, but he was always firm on that in his writings.
And it makes me feel pretty. Kerensky had successfully dealt with the violence, but he just couldn't catch a break. This increasing support for more extreme forms of socialism, along with the poor handling of the war, alarmed traditional liberals and bougie business boys. To appease them, Kerensky decided to promote a military legend to Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, someone who hated the revolution, loved the death penalty, and was devoutly anti-socialist, General Kornilov. Hey man, thanks for the promotion. That was real swell of you. Of course, with you by my side, who would dare try to overthrow me? How about me? I did not see this coming. Unfortunately for Kerensky, Kornilov hated the liberal and socialist reforms of the new government, particularly the dumb socialist soldiers' committees. The army was no place for undisciplined left-wing snowflakes. Fearing a Bolshevik takeover was imminent, Kornilov ordered his men towards Petrograd to oust the Soviet and take over. Kerensky freaked out, and he needed help. Since he knew Trotsky was finger-licking good at organizing, he and other Bolshevik leaders were released, and they, along with the Soviet, organized the defense of Petrograd. Kornilov had the power of soldiers, but the Soviet had the power of workers, and they did what workers do best.
Based. All right, Oversimplified, I see you.
Railroad workers...
Also, all right, Trotsky, I see you doing a few good things before you became a total worm. He was still a worm back then. But he did do some good things like that, and then he actually led the campaign to take out the Makhnovites, the anarchist bandits who were robbing and looting and terrorizing the peasants.
Diverted Kornilov's men away. Telegraph workers messed with his communications. They even infiltrated his forces and encouraged the demoralized men to desert. They were also armed en masse, but in the end, no fighting was necessary because Kornilov's coup just fell apart, and Kornilov was sent straight to prison. Everything was coming up Kerensky. Hey, thanks for the help, boys. Couldn't have done it without you. Now that there's no longer any threat, how about you, return all those guns I gave you? No. Oh, no.
Any attempt to disarm the working class should be frustrated by force if necessary. Karl Marx. You guys seen that dumbass meme? That's like, if you go far enough left, you get your guns back. I mean, I guess it is kind of true. I don't like framing it as like, liberal is left, and then if you go farther left than liberal, you get your guns back, because liberal is not left. But anyways, yeah, don't buy into the liberal narratives about firearms. Defend your Second Amendment right to defend yourself, because that, wasn't put in there. It was in the Constitution at a time when America was very revolutionary and progressive on a global stage in a lot of different ways, also doing a lot of horrible things like the genocide of the indigenous and whatnot. But there was also this really revolutionary, forward-thinking element to it. And the reason that that was put in the Constitution, when conservatives say this, it's true. It's for the formation of people's militias to resist the tyrannical government.
In order to kill a rat, Kerensky had just given a gun to a bear, a Bolshevik bear. The whole affair was a huge propaganda win for them. They had defended the revolution, and their popularity skyrocketed. They found themselves elected to the Petrograd-Moscow Soviets, with Trotsky even becoming chairman in Petrograd. They were now in a very powerful position, almost powerful enough for Lenin to return home from Finland and finally stage his long-awaited communist revolution. The Bolsheviks began planning their takeover of the Russian government. Some got cold feet and began arguing against Lenin's armed revolution in favor of a more peaceful approach, and they even wrote newspaper articles about it, which kind of gave the whole scheme away. The Bolsheviks are planning an armed revolution? I did not see this coming. Kerensky began arresting Bolsheviks, and as a result, Lenin and the boys felt they had no choice but to commence the revolution right now. Lenin was back in Petrograd, but was still in hiding, so Trotsky got the ball rolling, using his position as Soviet chairman to organize the Bolshevik militias. Now, if you were to ask Soviet artists, the revolution went...
I think they're overstating the role of Trotsky here. I don't know the history well enough, but I think one of the common Western myths is to overstate Lenin's connection with Trotsky and the role that Trotsky played as a revolutionary. And I think that's what they're doing here. It wasn't like, they're portraying Trotsky as if he was Lenin's second-hand man. And that was never the case. Lenin scolded Trotsky on multiple occasions and said that, he never took a firm position on any of the important questions of Marxism, but found his way to worm his way, in the middle of both positions to try and appease both sides. So that's probably like the worst inaccuracy I've seen so far in this video, is the portrayal of Trotsky as Lenin's second-hand man. Because then that argument that narrative is used to say, look how the revolution went wrong under Stalin, right? Everything got bad. Lenin and Trotsky were best buddies. Lenin wanted Trotsky to take over, but Stalin took over and became the world's most evil dictator. It's complete bullshit. Lenin and Stalin were tighter and had much more in common than Lenin and Trotsky. And Trotsky was not as important to the original revolution as they're making him out to be here. Although he was, a good Bolshevik for a while. Pretty good. Okay, Bolshevik. Not the best.
Something like this.
Yeah. And where the hell is Comrade Stalin? They mentioned Stalin in the last video for like 1 minute, and the fact that he was robbing banks to fund the Bolsheviks, but they said he was like kidnapping children or something to extort their parents. And that's all they've really said about him. So again, this is that Trotskyite narrative that I was just talking about, where, Stalin was the bad guy and Lenin and Trotsky were boys. It's not accurate. Trotsky's version was highly circulated in the Western world, which is why Western narratives are very sympathetic to him. That is one reason. There are many. Another reason is that being a Trotskyite allows you to call yourself a socialist and recognize that socialism is a superior ideology, and communism, Marxism, Leninism, well, maybe not Marxism, Leninism, but Marxism is a superior ideology. But never actually support socialism in practice. That's what being a Trotskyite allows you to do. Say, I'm a socialist, but every time that socialism's been tried, it hasn't worked. And you can take that position and still have a job in America, right? You can work at Yale or Harvard or any of these institutions. And in fact, a lot of Trotskyites have been in really prominent intellectual positions throughout American history. And what's off limits is saying, I support the Soviet Union under Stalin. What's off limits is saying, I support the fact that they beat the Nazis and industrialized their country and vastly increased the standard of living, and all this stuff about intentional starvation and the Holodomor is bullshit. That's what you're not allowed to say and keep a job. So that's the other reason. And the third reason is that the CIA was filled with Trotskyites, right? Because once Trotsky betrayed the Soviet Union, the Trotskyites were in the same position as the German fascists, of wanting to depose the Soviet socialist government. So that also aligned them with the interests of the Central Intelligence Agency when it was formed in 1947. So all of these Trotskyites and ex-Trotskyites were filtered into the CIA, and a lot of them were part of the Congress for Cultural Freedom, which was the CIA's main effort to influence leftist theory in the West, to influence leftist intelligentsia in the left and push it towards Trotskyism, to push it towards this impotent, I'm a socialist, but I agree with the CIA and German fascist and the Nazis that socialism has failed every time. except National Socialism. Just kidding. They don't say that. But the Trotskyite ideology, in that it wanted to depose the Soviet socialist government and the workers' state, aligned itself with the CIA. So they pushed the Congress for Cultural Freedom, really injected Trotskyism purposefully and strategically into the American intelligentsia in order to prevent people from becoming tankies, Marxist-Leninists who actually support socialism and revolution in practice.
As they would like you to think it was a glorious, violent, heroic takeover, the truth seems to be a little more underwhelming. The Bolsheviks just kind of walked into key buildings in the city and took control. Bolsheviks supporting sailors even brought in a huge battleship, but there wasn't really any fighting. Nobody really tried to stop them. In just one day, they took control of the city. Next, Kerensky just managed to escape before the Bolsheviks surrendered the Winter Palace, placing the provisional government under siege inside. Is it safe to come out yet? I think so. Fear my revolutionary mind.
If you guys, if you guys want to learn more about this, the October Revolution in specific, I recommend reading 10 Days That Shook the World by John Reed. It's a very classic communist Soviet history book. It was written by American journalist John Reed, who was actually in Russia at the time and got to witness the revolution firsthand. And he recorded everything that he saw, and it's really a brilliant book and a classic piece of Marxist literature that really everybody should read at some point.
Might. Give me that. That night, Lenin came out of hiding to play a bigger role in the revolution. With him back at the helm, they had one more job to do: storm the Winter Palace and arrest the provisional government. And here comes the final showdown. The palace was defended by a force known as the Battalion of Death, who immediately gave up. And just like that, Lenin had won. As far as violent, bloody revolutionary uprisings go, this wasn't really one of them. But Lenin was finally in charge of Russia. He had spent his whole life dreaming of this moment. He set up the first Council of People's Commissars, his own cabinet, with him in charge. This was it, his chance to finally make his communist utopia, with equality and freedoms beyond compare. Hey Lenin, before we took power, they were planning on holding...
Do I have utopian and scientific, folks? I don't really want to look through my entire bookshelf, but please, for the love of God, before you critique Marxism, please read the pamphlet. It's very short pamphlet. It's called Socialism, Utopian and Scientific by Friedrich Engels. And in this pamphlet, Engels lays out very clearly the distinction between Marxist socialism and utopian socialism, which believes that a utopia is possible and that it can be created overnight. The difference between scientific socialism and utopian socialism. Socialism based on building the best possible system that we can, using the existing material conditions that we recognize we are operating within. That's scientific socialism. Utopian socialism is, we're going to have a revolution and we'll all live in a commune and it'll be completely decentralized and we'll just share everything and, you know, we'll have this utopian form of communism overnight. Marx and that was a strand of socialists who believed that. Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, the Marxist-Leninist tradition specifically distinguishes itself from that because it is stupid. But people don't read. So this is the problem with oversimplified history. You oversimplify things to the point of distorting them. Or you just, scan a Wikipedia article and then throw a video together from it. But you're not actually doing any deep research into what these people believed and what they actually said themselves.
Holding elections. Shall we go ahead with those? Of course. You can't have a communist utopia without high levels of political participation. The proletariat should be free to elect who it. What? The social revolutionaries won. We lost. Those don't count. Lenin claimed the elections were unfair, and the constituent assembly they created was counter-revolutionary. He presented the new assembly with a motion that basically said, sign here and give up your power. And when the assembly was like, no, Lenin said, see, they're disobeying me. Proof they're counter-revolutionary. Shut it down, boys.
Hold on, I missed.
Moderate socialists another chance to finally make his communist utopia with equality and freedoms beyond compare. Hey Lenin, before we took power, they were planning on holding elections. Shall we go ahead with those? Of course. You can't have a communist utopia without high levels of political participation. The proletariat should be free to elect who it. What? The social revolutionaries won. We lost. Those don't count. Lenin claimed the elections were unfair, and the constituent assembly they created was counter-revolutionary. He presented the new assembly with a motion that basically said, sign here and give up your...
The electoral rosters had been finalized before a split occurred between the right and the left socialist revolutionaries, meaning left socialist revolutionaries who supported the Bolsheviks didn't contest separately. Lenin maintained. Okay. Okay, I see. So what it did was it erased the legitimacy of the Soviets. It went to made moves to overturn the actual power of the Soviets that was vested in them. And also the left social revolutionaries supported the Bolsheviks, but the elections were held before that split, so they weren't able to campaign for the Bolsheviks. And of course, interference and election rigging, just generally, especially back then when they didn't have cameras and stuff. It was a lot easier to pull something like that off. You didn't need 5,000 mules or whatever. How did the Trump people say? I've never even looked into this, but they say that Biden rigged the election by sneaking 5,000 mules in. These elections were a last-ditch effort by the Dem Socs to seize legitimacy. The Soviets had already voted to replace the old government with their own. Okay, that's a better way to explain it than what I said. I said they would look to overturn the power of the Soviets. This is making that more specific and concrete. The elections were a last-ditch effort by the social revolutionaries to take legitimacy from the Soviets, who had already voted to replace the old government with a Soviet government. So it was this last-ditch voting plan. It almost reminds me of the voting plan that was organized in Korea when it looked like the DPRK and the communists were going to take over the entire country, and they had popular support. The UN manufactured this, like, basically rigged voting plan to split the country in half and prevent democracy from actually playing out. So very similar thing here. Thank you for the super chat, Michelle. $5. Appreciate you. Have you considered doing a react stream of Epic History TV? They've done videos on all this stuff, Russia and Chinese revolutions. Absolutely, I'll do that. We'll do that on the next episode. How about that? Epic History TV, absolutely. I love debunking these YouTube history channels. Thank you, Comrade, for the $5.
Revolutionary. He presented the new assembly with a motion that basically said, sign here and give up your power. And when the assembly was like, no, Lenin said, see, they're disobeying me. Proof they're counter-revolutionary. Shut it down.
So now they're disobeying the Soviets. Proof that they're trying to subvert the will of the people in order to keep themselves in power. So this is probably the biggest distortion of reality that we've seen in this video so far.
Down, boys. Moderate socialists and others weren't happy when Lenin had the assembly closed by force.
Again, the problem with oversimplifying things is you don't give the context or all the information as to what was actually going on, and you distill things into Lenin was this dictator, so he overturned the will of the people, when in fact it was the opposite.
When campaigners began taking to the streets, they were fired upon. For Lenin, setting up a communist utopia was looking suspiciously like setting up a dictatorship. While he was implementing many of the communist policies you'd expect, he was also refusing to work with other political parties and cracking down on opposition. Hey Lenin, are you setting up a dictatorship?
Because the other political parties were trying to sabotage him at every turn. Because politics is war, and the other parties were waging war against the Bolsheviks, and by proxy, because the Bolsheviks were the representatives of the Soviets and the workers' organizations, they were subverting the will of the Russian masses, completely subverting democracy.
I'll shoot you if you are. Of course not. What a crazy theory. Anyway, I'm pleased to announce I'm setting up a secret police force to repress and kill traitors. And by traitors, I of course mean anyone not loyal to me. Owie, 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 owie.
Every country in the world has secret police. Every country in the world has intelligence forces. You know how stupid a socialist revolutionary government would have to be to not have intelligence forces? You know that every Western country invaded Russia after the revolution, right? You know that they dumped money and troops and funds into the White Army, and that they tried to foment dissent and pay and bribe traitors within the Bolsheviks' ranks. They needed intelligence operatives to sniff this stuff out. That's the reason Fidel Castro survived over 500 assassination attempts. They were intercepted by Cuban intelligence, which is notoriously good. Well, if they didn't do that, the U.S. would have given him an exploding cigar, and that would have been it.
Yeah, the assassination attempt.
Why are we allowed to have the CIA, but they're not allowed to have the KGB to counter the CIA? I don't think it was they were called the KGB then, but same thing. That's what they became.
On Lenin's life in August 1918 failed, but in response, the Bolsheviks ramped up their oppression. But while all of this chaos was erupting back home, Lenin and the boys were also distracted by another problem. They were still at war with the Germans, and they had promised to give the people peace. So Lenin made Trotsky Commissar for Foreign Affairs and sent him off to negotiate a peace deal with the Germans. The Germans offered Trotsky really harsh terms, because they were winning the war.
This is interesting. Moderate socialists in Russia at the time are the U.S. equivalent to left-wing Democrats who think DSA is too extreme. Yes, and as we always say, you can't stay neutral on a moving train. So as history progresses, and as countries and society enter times of crisis, and the capitalist, or in this case, feudal mode of production enters a time of crisis, these people always go to the right. They always go way further to the right. They attack the communists. They try to subvert democracy. They try to subvert the will of the working class in order to assert authoritarian dictatorial power. So they give these left-wing slogans, but then at times of crisis, they're the most right-wing reactionaries imaginable. And it's easy to imagine this happening in America. If there was a workers' revolution tomorrow, these idiots like Vush, who call themselves socialists, would be condemning it as authoritarian and saying we need to authoritarianly reinstate liberalism.
They demanded Russia give up a butt-ton of land, something that would be devastating to the economy. Look, I know it's not great, but I think we have to accept it. Are you insane? This will ruin us.
NKVD, that's what it was called. Yeah. He compared, Chris Hedges compared the NKVD with ICE and the Gestapo. Holy shit. That's your brain on liberalism, I guess.
Trotsky, you got a big brain. What do you think? How about no war, no peace? What's that, Mr. Trotsky, sir? It's simple. No war means we'll stop fighting the Germans, but no peace means we won't sign the peace treaty either. Then, when the Germans see we've just stopped fighting, they'll have to leave us alone or something. Trotsky, that's genius. I could kiss you. Do you want me to kiss you? Stop asking me that. Trotsky.
Again, where is the evidence that Trotsky was one of the main leaders at the time advising Lenin? Where is the evidence for this in anything that Lenin wrote or that Trotsky wrote, or, you know, any primary historical accounts? It's just not accurate. The decisions were made collectively at the top by the leadership, based upon the will of the masses, the working class. I mean, certain decisions were made at the top, certain decisions that needed to be made quickly, but the party operated based on democratic centralism as a whole. So really, they would take into account the views of everybody in the party. And then when they decided upon a direction, everybody would go with it. That was the democratic centralist principle that's so characteristic of the Leninist ideology.
Trotsky's no war, no peace plan was a huge success. Oh, wait, no, just kidding. It went exactly as you'd imagine. When the Germans saw the Russians had stopped fighting, they slammed 700,000 troops deep into Russian territory with no resistance. Now, the new peace treaty offered by the Germans was way worse, with Russia losing a huge amount of territory, population, and resources. The Bolsheviks had no choice but to accept, and Russia was humiliated. With Petrograd now in an exposed position, Lenin moved the capital to Moscow, just in case. Things really weren't going well for Lenin, and many people were extremely unhappy with the Bolshevik government and its actions. Lenin, you've pissed off so many people that they've united against you. We're under attack. Relax. We always expected some counter-revolutionary pushback. I think we can handle a few angry monopoly men. But Lenin, it's not just the monopoly men. Okay, who are we up against? Well, the liberals, the social revolutionaries, national separatists in Poland, Finland, and Ukraine, independent warlords setting up chiefdoms, anarchist rebels, the Green Peasant armies, the Cossacks, the Caucasian states, the Baltic states, the British, the French, the Americans, and the Japanese. Oh, and a legion of Czechoslovakian soldiers seem to have taken over.
So the capitalist imperialists and the reactionaries and the fake leftist reactionaries who Lenin predicted would be their enemies, who Lenin called counter-revolutionary from the very beginning. They act like Lenin was surprised. Oh, wow, the White Army, all these reactionaries and fascists and crazy, you know, anarchists calling themselves left-wingers are attacking us. Like, that was one of the main things that Lenin did with his theory, was point out how these people are counter-revolutionary, how these people are reactionaries, and how in the final analysis they side with the fascists and the right-wingers. Like I said, but he still had the support of the vast majority of his country, which is why they were able to win the Civil War, which was why the Red Army was victorious, despite the fact that the White Army and all these reactionaries that existed internally within their territory were being backed by, as they said, Japan and America and these outside forces hundreds of miles away from Russia. Well, in the case of the U.S., thousands of miles away from Russia. They were invaded by every Western country after the revolution, and the UK gave support to the White Army. France gave support to the White Army, and yet the Red Army still won. Clearly, they had massive support, overwhelming support among the people, to the point where they were able to expel and repel these imperialist powers who were far more industrialized and advanced at the time.
For the Trans-Siberian Railway and stolen all the imperial.
Thanks, Sebastian. Appreciate you, comrade. $2 super sticker. Let's go.
Gold reserves. What? How could this get any worse? Oh, and it says here your mother-in-law is coming to stay. No! A variety of anti-Bolshevik forces had united together to topple Lenin's government, and Russia descended into a full-blown civil war. Now, the Russian Civil War was extremely intricate and would really need its own video, but essentially, the anti-Bolshevik white movement gained control of vast, underdeveloped areas, while the Bolshevik Reds controlled the industrial heartland, using this to their advantage, along with the surprising military genius of Trotsky and the shocking disorganization.
Oh my goodness. Enough! Enough with the military genius of Trotsky. Whose idea was it to control the industrial centers? Whose idea was that? This guy called Karl Marx. Guys, if we can get the support of the industrial proletariat, we can win. They're the people who have the real power in the country. That was the theory of Marx and Lenin. The hell you talk about Trotsky for?
Of the White Army, the fortified Red Army gradually came out on top. It was an absolutely brutal conflict, with both sides committing horrendous atrocities. To maintain order at home, the Bolsheviks began the Red Terror, and the secret police would execute tens of thousands of suspected traitors. No one was safe from the violence, not even Nicholas.
What do you mean no one was safe from the violence? The people who weren't traitors to the country, the people who weren't siding with fucking Japan and America to kill their own countrymen and overthrow their own government, the people who didn't do that were safe. It was the people committing treason. And treason in any country is punishable.
Himself. You've probably been wondering what Nicholas has been up to this whole time. Well, after his abdication, he and his family were placed under house arrest. At first, they were allowed to live in their usual luxury, but after Lenin took over, their conditions worsened. The Bolsheviks were just holding on to Nick until they could work out what to do with him. But the Civil War...
What did they just say?
Live in their usual luxury, but after Lenin took over, their conditions worsened.
The Bolsheviks... They said the conditions of the people worsened. The conditions of the monarchs. I see.
Were just holding on to Nick until they could work out what to do with him. But the Civil War complicated things. The last thing they wanted was for Nick to be freed by the White Armies. And so, to stop this from happening, Nicholas's Bolshevik guards decided to act. It's not entirely certain whether Lenin ordered it, or if the guards were acting on their own volition. But on July 17th, 1918, with White Armies approaching, they woke Nicholas and...
I really don't think Lenin ordered it. I think it was... And I'm glad they're being more honest about that. Because there's no evidence for it. That this was ordered by anyone in the Bolshevik leadership. It's similar to like China, right? Where they talk about Mao executing all these landlords. Like, yes, Mao did allow that to happen, but it was more from the peasants. It was more a bottom-up thing. It was more these people who had been oppressed by the landlords for years and years and years wanted to unalive the landlords to kill them. I could say kill on YouTube. And Mao allowed them to do it. Right. Similar kind of thing here. Different, you know, because it's not like it was being done systematically at all. But it was like the rage, I think, of the Red Army and the Russian masses and those particular guards who were, you know, taking care of the Romanov family. It was their rage towards the monarchy and the years of starvation and endless war and oppression that motivated them to do it, less so than something that was ordered top down from the Bolsheviks. Lenin even criticized it, yeah.
And his family in the middle of the night and brought them into the basement. There, a drunken squad of Bolsheviks murdered the entire family. Nicholas, the last Tsar, once one of the most powerful men alive, had met a brutal end. But after years of fighting, and
just like all the people he brutalized, I mean, play stupid games, win stupid prizes, treat your people like shit, and, you know, you're at risk of them rebelling against you and doing the same thing to you. He fucked around and found out.
Millions of deaths. Trotsky and his Red Army came out victorious. Wow, that was a close one. Okay, back to creating a communist utopia.
after the Russian Civil War, that was brutal, and all these people died, and all these Russian proletarians died fighting the imperialist invading powers. That was a close one. Got out by the skin of our teeth.
How are we doing on that? Well, the Civil War helped create a massive famine and about 5 million people starved to death. There's massive inflation and the ruble is worthless. Hundreds and hundreds of kilometers of railway track have been destroyed. Disease and epidemics have killed 3 million. The population of Moscow and Petrograd has collapsed. Life expectancy has plummeted. Sailors in Kronstadt are rebelling. People are freezing to death in their own apartments and life has been reduced to a constant search for food and shelter. Whoa. Well, this just means I'll have to work twice as hard, day and night, to save the country. Nothing will stop me, short of a couple of sudden strokes. Get the doctor. One thing you have to keep in mind is that everything...
And then we got the GOAT. I mean, there was actually a lot of development that happened under Lenin, too. You know, they didn't even talk about the new economic policy or any of the development that Lenin oversaw. that really raised the standard of living of the people after, such a horrible war and after being in such a backwards feudal state. But then Stalin took over, even though they had Trotsky standing right there for some reason. Stalin took over and industrialized and lifted the people out of poverty the way that Lenin would have.
Thing I've been talking about, the Civil War, the assassination attempt, and Lenin's struggle to maintain control.
The NEP is kind of a big thing to gloss over. No kidding, right? Especially when they're talking about the economic state of the country.
Happening around the same time, and it must have been extremely stressful. Lenin began getting headaches, insomnia, and in 1922, he suffered 2 separate strokes. As the Soviet Union was officially declared under a strict one-party system, Lenin's health continued to decline, and his ability to lead the Communist Party went with it. Everybody
Do you guys think Lenin was poisoned? I know a lot of people who think so.
assumed Trotsky would succeed him. He was a great speaker, he'd won the Civil War, and he had a dope-ass train. The last person anyone expected to take over was Stalin. Stalin wasn't a great intellectual like Lenin, or a charismatic war hero like...
Yes, he was. What are you talking about? Oh my God. What are you talking about? Yes, he was charismatic. And yes, he was a hero of the Bolsheviks. What are you talking about? He was extremely popular. You think he just won an election out of nowhere? Nobody expected it. Nobody liked the guy. They all thought Trotsky was the man. This is Wikipedia level history. The people absolutely adored him, and the Bolsheviks too. He was beloved within the party, not just because of his actions as a hero in the revolution, but also because of his abilities as an intellectual, as a theorist, as one of the heads of Marxism. Holy shit.
Trotsky. He was, as one Menshevik described him, a gray blur, someone who operated in the background, someone who you might not even notice, but it was in the background that Stalin would rise to power. Here's how it happened. After the revolution, all the Bolsheviks hoped to get a cool job.
He just wasn't an individualist like Trotsky. He wasn't somebody who always tried to heap praise upon himself. And that's why he was beloved. And that's why Trotsky was not beloved, which is why they're completely overstating his relevance.
The new government. What did you get? Commissar for War. Sweet. What'd you get? Secretary. Stalin was made general secretary for the Communist Party. It wasn't what he wanted, but Stalin quickly realized that even though it wasn't fancy, it was a powerful position. As secretary,
they're acting like it's an office secretary. It's an extremely powerful and influential position that they absolutely would not have mocked him for getting. This part of the video has gotten extremely absurd to the point where I wonder what kind of research they even did for this beyond a quick Wikipedia skim.
he had the power to give people jobs within the party. So he would give jobs to all of his pals, who in turn would give him their support. The more pals he gave jobs, the more power he got. The more power he got, the more pals he got. Lenin may have been having wall-to-wall strokes.
The more power he got, the more pals he got. Wow. It's almost like he was a good leader. It was almost like he was beloved by the people. Do people in power get more friends when they're doing a bad job? But they act like it was just because he was, giving his friends powerful positions that everybody loved him.
But he was still involved in the party, and he was taking notice. He wasn't a fan of Stalin abusing his position or insulting.
Oh my, it's pure Trotskyism, folks. This is not true. This is completely made up by Trotsky and his ilk in order to justify toppling the Soviet workers' state under Stalin at a time when they were under attack from fascist Germany, which objectively put Trotsky and the people who say this on the side of the fascists.
His wife to her face. Lenin knew he couldn't let Stalin take over, but by this stage, he was just too sick to fight it. Hey man, tell whoever's in charge of giving...
Literally just read any of the quotes that Lenin said about Trotsky. He never had a good word to say about the guy. Everything he ever wrote about Trotsky was calling him a worm and telling people not to trust him. Everything. You could just Google, there's ChatGPT. Type into ChatGPT, give me every quote Lenin ever said about Trotsky. And tell me where he says Trotsky was this great leader, this hero, this person he wanted to take over instead of Stalin.
People jobs, not to let that jerk Stalin become the next leader. By the way, who did I put in charge of giving people jobs? That would be Stalin, sir. Bleh. Well,
this is the fake Lenin's death note that was circulated by the Trotskyites and by the counter-revolutionaries in order to delegitimize the Soviet government and the government under Stalin that had massive popular support among the workers and peasants.
Lenin's last wish was to not let Stalin take over, but by the time he died, Stalin was too powerful to remove. He had his remaining opponents arrested or killed. Trotsky was banished and fled to Europe. Eventually, he would be assassinated by Soviet spies in 1940. Our dear
No context. He just had all of his enemies killed. They didn't get put on trial and, you know, investigated and charged with collaborating with fascist Germany or, you know, actual violent extremist counter-revolutionary forces. None of that. No, he just purged people for no reason because he's such a mean guy. So mean.
Your comrade Lenin has died. We should have a state funeral. No. Let's mummify him and put him on display so people can look at his dead body forever. That's gross. You're gross. Guards, kill him. Lenin had waited so long to take control in Russia.
Are they really mocking the Lenin mausoleum? I really hate liars. Yeah, this last part of the video got really disgusting. I mean, that part especially, acting like Lenin, like Stalin didn't have respect for Lenin, and he wanted to mummify him because of the mausoleum, because of the, you know, burial they gave him that immortalized him in Russian society forever. This is so disgusting. They are vampires.
But he never got to see his communist utopia. His short time in charge was spent dealing with the destroyed Russian economy, World War I, and the Civil War. He was cruel and merciless, but he really did seem to believe communism would make Russia a better place. Stalin, on the other hand, would take the Soviet Union down a different path. If you thought Lenin was a tyrant, well, you ain't seen nothing yet, girl. A secret police state, a rapidly militarizing superpower, led by a paranoid man who deeply distrusted...
Rapidly militarizing? Holy cow, that's scary, that's bad. They were rapidly militarizing? What, were they about to get invaded by Hitler or something? How could you justify rapidly militarizing? Every country in the world during World War II became a military dictatorship, and in the lead up to it, every country in the world, because they needed to. Even the US had to do like central economic planning and put all of the country's resources towards war. And we had, you know, internment camps for the Japanese. We were doing things that were far more authoritarian to our political enemies and people backed by foreign reactionaries, or even people not backed by foreign reactionaries, but people who had the same ethnicity even. We were doing far worse than locking them up or making them disappear. And, you know, the internment camps I don't support. They were bad, but it's understandable because it was wartime, right? They were trying to defeat Hitler and Hirohito and the fascist forces that were rampaging and raping and pillaging all across the world.
...trusted the West would see the world come to the brink of nuclear annihilation. That's right, I'm talking about...
You skipped the Second World War. You skipped the part where they beat Hitler. You skipped the part where the revolution industrialized their country and brought it out of this feudal backward swamp that you admitted it was under the Tsar. And they defeated in the industrialized superpower that was the German Empire. You skipped over that and went right to the Cold War. How do you do something on the Russian Revolution and not talk about World War II? You do mention the Cold War, but you skip World War II? What are we doing here? You just don't want people to know that they beat Hitler. You just don't want people to know that the communist revolution was the only reason that they weren't taken over by Germany and that all the Slavs didn't get exterminated by the Nazis because they had a communist revolution and were able to industrialize faster than any other country had in human history. You skip over that? Come on.
Remember to click the link in the description below.
Rise of Kingdoms. Play now as Eddie Liger Smith with a 99 magic ability.